Sirens comes to a close as each primary character makes a significant decision, and some deeper truths are revealed. The Netflix miniseries picks up with Devon DeWitt, a rough-and-ready fast food worker who cares for her father full-time, as she sets out for a luxury island in search of her sister, Simone. The younger girl had essentially fallen off the grid when she accepted a job as personal assistant to millionaire philanthropist Michaela Kell. The second Devon arrived at the Kells' mansion, she was unsettled by the strange influence Michaela seemed to hold over Simone. Devon came to the conclusion in Netflix's Sirens that Michaela was the head of a cult, and that the only way to free Simone from her bizarre attachment was to walk the walk. Over the period of Labor Day weekend, however, Devon was only presented with further questions. Michaela really seemed to be a monster, but Simone loved and worshipped the woman. Still, things fell apart for Simone when it appeared to Michaela that she and her husband Peter were having an affair. Faced with returning to her childhood trauma, Simone made a surprising decision at the end of Sirens. Why Simone took Michaela's place in Sirens' ending. Returning to her past wasn't an option, but Simone's choice was still self-serving. Simone had been entirely loyal to Michaela throughout Sirens. When Peter kissed her, she immediately put a stop to it and kept the secret from her boss so as not to hurt her. Prior to the very end of the miniseries, Simone never would have dreamed of usurping Michael's place as Mrs. Kell. However, after getting fired, Simone was faced with the reality of returning to her old life. Her father, Bruce, saw this as an opportunity to make up for his neglect of Simone when she was a child, but this was like a personal hell to Simone. Panicked, she tried to run away, which is when she ran into Peter on the beach. Each episode of Sirens further emphasized the fact that Simone is an immensely traumatized person. It subtly revealed that she made several self-destructive decisions in her past, including sleeping with her married college professor. Simone is genuinely kind and has a good heart, just as Michaela said in the final episode of Sirens, but she frequently makes poor choices in her search for happiness and security. Ultimately, going back to her old life wasn't an option, and Simone took advantage of the opportunity that was presented to her. Peter was there and willing, so Simone went through the door. Devon's choice to walk away from Simone explained. Devon had to leave Simone to her mistakes. Devon crying in Sirens. Like Simone, Devon has a tendency to make toxic life choices. These sisters both experienced the trauma of their mother's suicide, but they dealt with it in different ways. Devon took on the role of caretaker and simply couldn't help but drop everything in her own life to care for Simone or her father, Bruce. Still, Devon's trauma meant that her responsible role within her family was juxtaposed by her own toxic choices. She became essentially addicted to seducing men at every chance she could get, and alcohol became a dangerous vice in her life. All of this is profoundly connected to Devon's choice to talk away from Simone at the end of Sirens. She had upturned her life to chase her little sister down and save her from Michaela, but in the end, Simone was a real problem in her own life. Devon could have continued to fight to save Simone from herself, but that would have been just another toxic decision on the older sister's part. Simone was no longer a little girl who needed saving. Devon had to leave her to face the consequences of her choices so that she could focus on bettering her own situation. It was painful, but necessary. Was Michaela really leading a cult in Sirens? The full truth about Michaela Kell. Michaela in Sirens. From Devon's perspective in Sirens, Michaela was a dangerous cult leader. Though the millionaire's relationship with her assistant was indeed inappropriate, Devon ultimately realized that her initial conclusion about Michaela hadn't been fair. In truth, the woman was just as broken as the DeWitt sisters. She had used her own past trauma to construct a beautiful armor. This, Michael's radical generosity, and her position as Mrs. Kell meant she had a sort of natural allure that pulled the hurt and broken toward her. She established the rules, and people listened. Devon's revelation about Michaela came after the reveal that Peter's first wife had never been murdered. Following the divorce, the woman underwent extensive plastic surgeries, resulting in some serious medical complications. The previous Mrs. Kell became a recluse, and this inspired the rumors around town that Michaela had murdered her. Even without the murder allegations, Michaela, as the other woman, was regarded as the villain of the story. Of course, we see at the end of Sirens that this isn't a fair role assignment. Who was the real monster at the end of Sirens? Sirens explores trauma and choices, and how men and women face different consequences. Michaela's final line in Sirens demonstrates the maturity and self-awareness Devon initially thought was above her. After Devon told Michaela that she isn't a monster, the woman pointed out that Simone isn't either. Of course, she could have easily thought differently. Simone had essentially stolen Michaela's husband, and she might have labeled her the enemy as a result. However, Michael recognized that Simone had only done the same thing she had back in the day. They weren't monsters, but just traumatized and hurt women making poor choices in pursuit of security and happiness. The events of Sirens slowly revealed details that made all three female central characters, Michaela, Simone, and Devon, seem like the titular monsters of Greek mythology. Devon lured in several men from episode to episode, Michaela lured in Peter and Simone herself lured in Ethan, Devon, and, finally, Peter. They were each called a monster at one point or another. However, interestingly, Peter Kell was never identified as a monster, despite his similarly toxic decisions. In truth, even Peter wasn't a monster. Sirens never dives into his past trauma, but it's revealed that he suffers from panic attacks like Simone does, implying a similarly difficult past. The idea of Sirens is that none of these characters are just monsters intending to do terrible things to others. Hurt people, regardless of gender, but only women seem to be expected to carry the responsibility of their, and others', choices. What's next for Simone, Devon, and Michaela after Sirens ending? Sirens hints at their futures. Sirens poster. Michaela and Devon discuss their next steps at the end of Sirens. While Simone proceeds into what is surely to become a new marriage with Peter Kell, Devon will head back to Buffalo to care for her father. However, Devon will purchase a home nearby rather than live with the man and devote all her sanity to his well-being. This is a rare, healthier choice on her part, and will hopefully be the first step in breaking one of Devon's more toxic habits, putting her own needs on the wayside for the needs of her family.